Was Batman really killed after being stabbed by the Joker in DCKO?
Peak fiction incoming.
Well, today you're gonna find out, because we're gonna be covering DCKO Night Fight issue number 1, aka the newest tie-in issue to DC's latest event, and it is a wild ride from start to finish. So with that being said, as we all know, in the first issue of DCKO, the heroes were thrown into this giant death trap race, and in the midst of trying to reach the portals that would allow them to qualify for the tournament, Batman realized that instead of trying to play for himself, Clark was helping his fellow teammates qualify by going after one group of Omega demons after another. So he tried getting Clark's head in the game by reminding him of what was at stake, but before he could even finish getting his point across, a massive spear shot by none other than the Joker came flying through the air before impaling him in the chest, because somehow a large portion of the villains managed to escape the Phantom Zone before deciding that they wanted a shot at winning the tournament as well. But did Batman actually die, or did his journey just take a turn into another direction? Well, initially our issue picks up during the past inside Gotham, before the tournament was even in discussion. And while running amongst the city rooftops, listening to the sound of his bones cracking, Bruce began to express that his body wasn't as good as it used to be, stating that even though he was still dedicating his life to the mission, he couldn't deny the fact that his age was betraying him. Nevertheless, he then goes on to explain that he's in pursuit of Professor Pig because him and his circus kidnapped an entire school bus full of kids. But upon arriving to the scene, he quickly realized that he was too late to save all the children, but not because Pig managed to escape or harm anybody, but because he realized that Nightwing, Red Hood, Damian, and Tim had the situation under control already. And upon this realization, he then goes on to say that there was once a time in life where he was alone in Gotham City, but now his family patrolled the streets along his side, and whenever he would watch them work, he couldn't help but see glimpses of himself in different ways. Nightwing was very similar to him in the way that he was just naturally a very good leader. Despite being very rebellious, Jason was a survivor, and although he had sort of a bad habit for always resorting to violence, Bruce actually sort of envied him for this because he was able to sort of embrace his anger in a way that he never could. Tim, on the other hand, was the brains of all the Robins. You know, he was always thinking and planning, and Damian, despite being raised to be a killer by a group of assassins, it was clear that he had a very big heart and a passion for healing others. Nevertheless, we then see the four Robins getting a notification that Mr. Freeze was attacking Gotham Zoo, so they collectively pulled out their grappling hooks and began swinging their way throughout the city so they could put a stop to yet another familiar rogue, as Batman himself then began wondering if it was even necessary for him to watch over Gotham because his sons were already doing an incredible job without his assistance. Our story then circles back over to the past, to the very moment that Batman died in Superman's arms before morphing into a statue of stone. However, unlike Shazam, Blue Beetle, Black Canary, and the other people who didn't qualify for the tournament, soon enough Batman's statue began cracking and crumbling as some sort of strange but also familiar energy began radiating out of the center of his chest. That's when we see him arriving back to Gotham City, revealing that because the Justice League was allowed to bring tools into the tournament, he secretly brought some apocalyptian armor that was outfitted with a special boom tube that would teleport him back home if he was inactive for too long. That way, he still wouldn't be out of the fight even if he fell out of the tournament due to being defeated. However, upon walking over to a gargoyle to get a closer look at the city, he quickly realized that this wasn't his version of Gotham. So he began wondering how long he was stuck as a statue, while also wondering if they successfully defeated Darkseid before tapping into the Watchtower radio and asking for Mr. Terrific. But instead of gaining answers, somebody hurled a Birdarang directly into his communication device, and that's when he realized that an entire army of Robins who referred to him as the Bat Who Fell were closing in on his location. Despite being confused in more ways than he could count though, Bruce knew that he couldn't just stand there and throw in the towel, so as one of the Robins reported him as a so-called illegal Batman sighting, he then began countering all their attacks while analyzing the different ways that they were fighting, and soon enough he was 100% confident that he knew exactly who the person that trained them was. But due to the fact that one of the Robins called in reinforcements, it wasn't long before he was facing pressure from 7 Robins and counting. So he started leaping from rooftop to rooftop, desperately looking for some sort of answer as to why Gotham was unrecognizable, but eventually none other than the Batman of this future, aka Richard Grayson, stopped him dead in his tracks, implying that Bruce was never supposed to return unless he wanted to go to war. Now, seeing that Richard was Batman, Bruce was now even more confused than he already was. So he tried asking him how long ago they defeated Darkseid and if he knew who won the tournament, but Richard had no idea what he was talking about and simply just accused Bruce of doing something terrible. And what was that terrible thing? Well, here's what he says exactly. You put yourself in a Lazarus pit. You had your own special brand of midlife crisis. Your body was giving up on you, but you refused to give up being Batman. I tried to help you, but you rejected me. You rejected all of us. And so of course, Batman is like, what? What are you talking about? I was in a tournament to end Darkseid. None of this makes sense. To which Nightwing responds as they clash fists, the Lazarus Pit drove you crazy, just like it did to Ra's, Talia, Jason, and Selina. And hearing that Selina went into the Lazarus Pit caught Bruce off guard, so he temporarily let his guard down, allowing Grayson to pull out his grappling gun to restrain Bruce from moving before walking over to a nearby ledge and revealing a so-called Bat Tower. And so what he does here is he basically starts explaining that he took his leadership skills and his ability to build a team from the Titans and then took that idea to the next level by creating an organization known as Robin Incorporated. And so apparently they have training grounds all over the world. His fellow Titans actually help train some of the Robins. And what he says exactly is that we created a support system that grew outside of Gotham in a way that you never could. And so he's basically sort of bragging and boasting about how he's a better Batman than Bruce. And so he goes on to say, Robin Incorporated has Robins in every major city in the world, run by Barbara, Cass, Duke, Steph, and our numbers are growing every day. Now, eventually he frees Bruce of his restraints, but he's still persistent that Bruce should stop being Batman and just, hang up the gloves. He says, you were always too much of a control freak, Bruce. You didn't like to share, so I did what you couldn't. I trusted others. This is why I kept saying to you that you could stop, you could retire. And while pulling off his cowl, he then says, let your legacy continue with me. But in denial that this is the way that things should be, Bruce then says, this is not you. So Nightwing says, not me? Do you even know yourself anymore? To which Bruce responds, this is not what I wanted for you. I didn't want you to continue the burden. I wanted you to have your own life. You created your own identity, and I wanted you to keep that. But refusing to believe that Bruce was telling the truth, Grayson then says, you didn't want us to take the burden from you because you refused giving up Batman. Because you know that without it, you're nothing. So Bruce responds, maybe that's true, but I have to ask, you've built all this, and you still have Robins. Would you let any of them become Batman? Now, because Grayson couldn't give him a straight answer, eventually Bruce decided to switch topics, expressing that he knew things weren't right and he needed to find out why. However, the facial expression he made while saying this put Grayson under the impression that he was gonna try escaping again. So he gave Bruce one last chance to stand down and surrender, but refusing to let the mystery of why he was here go unsolved, Bruce simply put his fists in the air, asking Grayson if he forgot who trained him. So Grayson pulled out his Eskrima sticks and prepared for yet another exchange, stating that he had beat Bruce once before and he wasn't afraid to do it again. That's when the two Batmen began running towards each other at full speed, and it wasn't long before they were fully engaged in combat. But upon Bruce trying to slow Grayson down by throwing a cluster of batarangs his way, Grayson not only managed to deflect them with help from his wrist guards, but then hit Bruce with a devastating roundhouse kick to the chest before uppercutting him in the jaw and kicking him out of a nearby window. Nevertheless, as Bruce began plummeting towards the city streets, he eventually pulled out his grappling gun before using it to latch onto a different building, where he would then manage to catch Grayson off guard by uppercutting him into the air and battering him onto the ground. And shortly after doing so, he'd expressed that they needed to solve this case by working together, but unfortunately for him, things didn't go according to plan, because it wasn't long before Grayson was back on his feet chucking an Eskrima stick directly at his face. And this was just the beginning for Grayson, because right after doing that, he'd then walk over to Bruce and hit him with such a devastating blow that he fell onto the ground, while expressing that he was a better Batman than him because he trusted people and didn't lead with fear. And as Bruce laid there on the ground, Grayson tried getting through to him one last time, indicating that this was the end of him being Batman, and if he didn't listen to him, then he was gonna throw him inside of Arkham, before offering Bruce his hand and stating that Gotham didn't need him anymore. And at first, Batman genuinely considered that maybe Grayson was right, and he was too blind to realize that it was his turn to take over the mantle. But then the mother box inside of his armor started pinging all over the place as it received a signal from the Heart of Apocalypse, which is when he finally realized that he was being put through some sort of test/trial, and the only way he was gonna get through it was by overcoming his disciples. So once again, he demanded Grayson to keep on fighting him, but after a brief little exchange, Grayson quickly put him inside of a headlock and completely restrained him from moving. And that's when Bruce says, if you're Batman, where's Jason, Tim, and Damian? Where are your brothers? To which Grayson responds while continually choking him, don't you remember? You let your fear of us replacing you drive you insane long before you went into the Lazarus Pit. You said that there can only be one Batman, that there could only be you. They're not here because you killed them. And that's when we see the final panel with a statue of all the other Robins. But sadly, that's where this issue comes to an end. But if you guys want to see what happens with Batman and DCKO next, next? Let me know in the comments down below.